Our story begins with a contract gem identified as the most useless of its kind, destined to be tossed away like common trash. But as he looked at its cross-section, which resembled a piece of matcha jelly, a bold and reckless idea began to take root in his mind. Disregarding everything, he swallowed it right there in public, while the entire school mocked him as a delusional madman. What they didn't know, however, was that he had actually formed a contract with himself, gaining absolute control over his own body. He immediately commanded himself to perform 500 push-ups, unaware that this was merely the beginning of his journey. Because once he absorbed the energy of a second gem, he would witness the most startling truth of this world. At this moment, we see him using a knife to cut open an awakening stone that others considered waste. He felt a flicker of disappointment until something changed. Looking at the sliced crystal, he felt a sudden, strange craving for that smooth, bright, and translucent surface. It looked exactly like matcha jelly. Suddenly, a crazy thought exploded in his head. What would happen if he absorbed it himself? To control oneself with 100% mastery over the flesh was an unprecedented path, but he decided to go for it anyway. After all, the worst that could happen was a bit of lost energy. He picked up the stone and guided the energy into his body. Other creatures might have rejected it, but he did not. As the crystal energy entered his core, an indescribable sensation washed over him. It felt as though his body and consciousness had perfectly merged into one. After a long moment, he opened his eyes and silently thought, "Go pour a glass of water." In the next second, his body moved on its own. Like a bystander, he watched his own legs get out of bed, walk to the table, and pour the water. The entire process was incredibly smooth and irreversible. It still consumed his physical strength, of course, but it required zero mental effort to control. After finishing the water, he issued a new command: complete 500 push-ups. Immediately, his body dropped to the floor. He began performing them at a rapid pace. 1, 2, 100. By the time he reached 250, his muscles were screaming in pain. His willpower had reached its absolute limit. Yet under the weight of the absolute command, his body simply kept moving. Finally, the 500 push-ups were complete. He lay on the ground exhausted, unable to lift a finger, yet a wide smile spread across his face. It was fascinating. This ability was the ultimate tool for self-discipline, even if it didn't seem particularly useful just yet. But at the very least, this allowed him to push past his limits during training. The next day, while he was still deep in sleep, his eyes suddenly snapped open. His body dressed itself, walked out of the dormitory, and headed to the playground to start running. This was the command he had set for himself the night before. Imagine the scene. It's 4 in the morning, his consciousness is still wandering in a dream, yet his body is moving like a piece of precision machinery. It faithfully executed the program until 6 o'clock, when he finally woke up completely to find himself already sitting in the cafeteria. A bowl of white porridge and 3 steamed buns sat before him. Not bad at all. A wide grin spread across his face as he praised his own genius idea. Just then, a commotion broke out nearby. "Good morning, Luo Shiyu. Goddess, I've already bought breakfast for you." He looked toward the noise and saw Shiyu, the famous beauty from the next class. She was incredibly popular with countless fans, including one of his former roommates. While munching on a bun, he habitually raised his head to look at her. In the next second, however, his pupils suddenly contracted to the size of pinpricks. A chill ran down his spine as he lowered his head, using the act of drinking porridge to hide the storm of shock brewing within him. In his memory, Shiyu was a slender girl with a beautiful face, but what he had just seen was a 2-meter-tall, upright walking, monstrous beast. Its face was covered by a thin disguise of a young girl's features, and it walked boldly through the crowd as if it belonged there. Yet everyone around her was looking at her with eyes full of adoration, seemingly completely unaware. What on earth is going on, he wondered. As the beast passed by him, it let out a greeting that sounded raspy to him, yet incredibly sweet to everyone else. "Good morning, Zhangping." He screamed at himself internally to stay calm. Keeping his expression neutral, he simply nodded. "Good morning, Shiyu." Fortunately, she didn't linger and continued on her way. He finished his breakfast as quickly as possible without drawing any unwanted attention. He left the cafeteria just like any other day. As a mature adult, he understood that now was certainly not the time to panic or act impulsively. He walked calmly toward the teaching building, intending to head to the faculty office. However, as he reached the door, he stopped cold. Through the glass, he saw a teacher's true form, another beast wearing a disguise. He forced himself to walk past the door without changing his expression. Even the teachers couldn't be trusted. If 2 were lurking in a single school, he wondered how many were hiding in the entire city. Who was really in charge here? He ducked into a deserted corner, realizing there was still much he didn't understand about his new reality. He was certain that before absorbing that crystal, he had been just like everyone else, seeing nothing. Therefore, this change must have originated from that contract gem. He reached out once more, condensing a new gem, and absorbed its energy without a moment's hesitation. If one gem allowed him to see the truth, what would a second one do? This time, the sensation was entirely different. If yesterday was about the union of body and mind, now it felt like a connection with the universe itself, as his senses were infinitely magnified. The world became brighter and more vivid than ever before. He opened his eyes and scanned the classroom until his gaze landed on an empty desk. He keenly caught a faint, lingering scent of energy residue. Suddenly, a haunting vision flickered before his eyes. While the teacher lectured on the podium, a giant beast was silently approaching a student. It was a chilling sight, to say the least. 2 lines of cold text appeared before him. Appraisal successful. This was a desk stained with tainted energy. It revealed that a top student had once been victimized by a beast here, and remarkably, no one had ever noticed. Looking at the tainted desk, a thought occurred to him. He immediately turned his gaze toward himself to test his new power. He stared fixedly at his own reflection for a full minute until, with a flash, lines of text expanded before him. Appraisal successful. Summoned Beast, Zhang Ping. Master, Zhang Ping. Race, Human. Potential, 3 stars. Lifespan, 89 years. Talent, Contract Gem. The talent allowed him to consume physical and mental strength to condense gems, establishing a deep link with a target. The target would receive his potential and luck. Furthermore, repeatedly absorbing them could slightly increase his own potential. There was also a 1% chance to awaken new talents, such as Absolute Order, giving him total sovereignty over his summoned beasts. Then there was Absolute Obedience, ensuring total loyalty, and an unstable appraisal skill to gather information on any target. The success rate depended on the power gap between them. He had actually managed to appraise himself. Quite an achievement, really. He looked at the bizarre status screen where he was both the beast and the master, not knowing whether to laugh or cry at the absurdity. But then, a wave of pure ecstasy washed over him. This wasn't a useless gem at all. It was a contract gem capable of awakening new talents. This meant he had infinite possibilities. While others had only one superpower, he could keep absorbing energy to gain a second, or even a third. Now that Zhang Ping finally had a trump card to survive this eerie world, he had to uncover the truth about Pearl City. Was it truly a human city, or just a hunting ground for beasts in disguise? He certainly didn't want his own desk to become tainted. At noon, after a quick bite to eat, he left the school. He used visiting Su Jingyao as an excuse to head out. In reality, he intended to investigate the patrol team headquarters and see just how many monsters were hiding in this city. As he stepped onto the main street, the world before him was completely overturned. Inside a cold drink shop, a humanoid beast sat cross-legged. It was gnawing on a strange piece of meat that emitted a golden glow while reading a newspaper. To anyone else, it looked perfectly normal. He appeared to be just a middle-aged man eating a snack. Zhang Ping didn't look away, silently activating his appraisal. It was a success. It was a skystretch fox, a mutated beast with the talent of cognitive distortion. It turns out they can warp how others perceive reality. No wonder no one ever noticed them. As he continued walking, he saw even more of these skystretch foxes along the way. They were shopping and chatting like ordinary people, even haggling fiercely over a few dollars. It was a bizarrely domestic sight. They possessed intelligence no lower than a human's. 2 hours later, he finally arrived at the patrol team headquarters, a place under heavy guard. The atmosphere here was grim, seemingly at odds with the peaceful world outside. He took a deep breath and walked to the information desk. He looked at the smiling staff member in uniform and spoke calmly. He told her he was looking for someone. Behind the counter, that skystretch fox asked in a raspy voice who he was looking for. His face remained entirely expressionless as he said, Su Jingyao. After he gave the name, the fox nodded and looked through the records. A moment later, she looked up with those non-human eyes. She confirmed Su Jingyao was still at headquarters and offered to call her over. He agreed, though his heart began to sink. The moment he nodded, his talent activated again. Appraisal successful. Another skystretch fox, but this one had an extra talent, unexplained trust. A chill ran through him. This creature was significantly stronger than the one he had encountered back at the school. Her talents were stranger and far harder to deal with. He realized then why humans were forced to stay on the defensive. These monsters were simply born stronger. As footsteps approached, he looked up and forced a smile onto his face. The act, after all, had to continue. 2 skystretch foxes approached, and we see that one of them wore a disguise that was the exact image of Su Jingyao, shimmering with a faint light. It looked unsettlingly artificial. Zhang Ping, why have you come to find me? The fox asked, still wearing Su Jingyao's face. Its voice was raspy and distinctly non-human, forcing him to smile more naturally as he replied, I was just worried you weren't adjusting to the patrol team. He asked how she felt, suggesting she join him in farming if it was too much. Who would farm with you? I need to stay here to get stronger. I want to protect this city and get justice for my parents, she barked, perfectly mimicking Su Jingyao's fiery temper. He let out a long sigh, appearing genuinely regretful for her sake. Well, it seems you're adjusting just fine. That's a relief, then. When she asked if he was truly set on farming, he shrugged with an air of helpless resignation. What choice do I have with such a useless ability? I'm off. Who knows when we'll meet again? She simply nodded and turned away without a hint of lingering affection. To be honest, it was chilling. He walked calmly out of the headquarters and looked up at the piercingly blue sky. After a long moment, he exhaled a heavy, weary breath like a man who had lost everything, before turning into a restaurant across the street corner. He took a seat by the window where he could watch the headquarters main gate, ordered the cheapest tea available, and just sat there. He sat as still as a statue. Anger hadn't clouded his mind. Instead, the more furious he felt, the colder and more focused he became. Recklessness solves nothing and only leads to a faster defeat. So he spent the entire afternoon staring until dusk finally arrived. He finally had his answer. As he stood to return to school, he realized the truth. In the entire patrol team, there wasn't a single living human. They were all monsters draped in disguises. That was the grim conclusion of his afternoon vigil. Anyone who joined the patrol team was essentially walking into a trap. The city's supposed guardians had been completely hollowed out by these creatures. Pearl City, as it turns out, was nothing more than a massive, defenseless hunting ground, and the citizens were merely livestock being raised for the slaughter. It made sense now why they were even in the schools. The city had fallen long ago. Graduation was 3 months away, but for him, the ceremony had lost all meaning. He stopped attending those pointless classes, moving only between his dorm, the field, and the cafeteria. Living like an ascetic monk, he pushed his body to the limit, telling everyone he was simply building a foundation for his future as a farmer. Zhang Ping wasn't the only one doing this. Many students who awakened useless abilities and faced a hopeless future chose to live out their days quietly at school. However, we see that he quickly discovered a pattern. Those seemingly ordinary students were actually the safest, as the Skystretch Fox's hunting targets were very specific. They wanted those in key departments like Su Jingyao, or those with extraordinary talent like Luo Xiyu. As for our protagonist, a summoner unable to obtain a beast was a recognized failure destined for the fields. In their eyes, he posed no threat whatsoever. This lack of potential became his best camouflage. Every day, he could feel himself growing stronger as his physical fitness and potential improved at a visible rate. He treated the contract gems he condensed as daily supplements, consuming them to push his limits further. As soon as his physical and mental energy recovered, he would immediately produce another. After a few days, though no new talent had awakened yet, the results were staggering. He could now perform 1,000 consecutive push-ups, and his stamina recovered almost instantly afterward. The days of total exhaustion were behind him. That night, sitting cross-legged on his bed, he condensed yet another contract gem. He absorbed its energy without a second thought. Suddenly, the world went silent, as if he had been pulled into a void of absolute stillness. Seconds passed before the sounds of crickets and frogs rushed back into his ears. He immediately used his appraisal skill on himself. The appraisal was a success. Summoned Beast Zhang Ping, 4-star potential. Talents: Contract Gem, Absolute Command, and Absolute Obedience. Along with his unstable appraisal, he had gained Night Walker, granting night vision, reduced presence, and increased speed in the dark. He could now achieve complete invisibility within the shadows. It was done. He felt a surge of excitement. He didn't even need to check the status panel. His body provided the most direct feedback. He leaped from the bed, feeling as light as a feather, his movements fluid and effortless. Outside, something trailing thick black smoke passed silently over the city. He took a sharp breath, realizing that if that thing attacked, the consequences would be unthinkable. This world, as it turned out, was 10,000 times more dangerous than he had imagined. The shift from 3-star to 4-star potential was far more significant than just gaining a new talent. He powered through 2,500 push-ups in one go, and felt he could easily manage 500 more. Naturally, his lighter body weight helped, but the improvement was undeniably real. His 5 senses had also become incredibly sharp, allowing him to hear the faint grinding of teeth from the next dorm. He wondered what level he had truly reached. He lay back on the bed and began to calculate his true strength, knowing that in this world, power levels were simple and brutal. Levels 1 to 9 were considered junior. Levels 10 to 20 were intermediate, followed by senior and top-tier ranks. As for the legendary king rank, well, no one in Pearl City had ever even seen a trace of one. The next day, we see him wake up to find himself automatically running on the playground before dawn had even broken. Yet his spirit was surprisingly high, as his increased potential had even reduced his need for sleep. After finishing his run, his body automatically led him toward the cafeteria, following the commands he had set the night before, until that specific figure appeared. It was his classmate, Luo Xiyu. That soul-chilling aura still made his entire body go stiff. Suddenly, she stopped right next to a girl who looked absolutely thrilled to see her. She reached out and lightly rested her hand on the girl's shoulder, leading her away from the line as if they were the closest of friends. Then, she nonchalantly dragged her toward the food counter, as if she were simply picking out a companion for breakfast at a buffet. He gripped his chopsticks so hard his knuckles turned white, keeping his head low and forcing himself to shove every bit of food on his plate into his mouth. He told himself he had to finish before that scent drifted over and then get out of there. As he made his exit, many in the cafeteria were still envying the lucky girl chosen by the goddess to share a meal. In their eyes, of course, it was a sign of favor, but in his eyes, it was a silent hunt. That girl was being led away by a hideous monster. As her figure gradually vanished into the crowd, he knew he had to understand the enemy's true nature. He clenched his fists tightly. He rushed back to the dorm, slammed the door shut, and issued a command to himself: 1,000 push-ups. Sweat quickly soaked through his clothes, but he didn't stop, moving on to 500 sit-ups and 300 frog jumps. With bloodshot eyes, he roared at himself internally. He spent the entire morning pushing his body to the absolute limit, and by noon, after a quick meal and 2 hours of rest, he began practicing his strikes, recalling the techniques taught in his martial arts class, the Pearl Three Fists. There was rat chase for smaller foes, running wolf for a lethal strike against equals, and ox seek for wearing down massive opponents. Though there were only 3 moves, they were the life-earned experiences of his predecessors. He wasn't a physical type, but he had his contract gems. His potential had no upper limit. At 9 in the evening, he changed into black clothes and slipped out of the dorm like a ghost. On the playground, junior students were still practicing their drills. He ignored them, only casting a distant glance toward the girls' dormitory. His fists tightened in his pockets once more. "Don't rush, Zhang Ping," he told himself, knowing he was still far too weak to leave the school. He merged completely into the night, his night walker talent making him feel as if he didn't exist in this world as passers-by walked right past him. They simply didn't see him. He began to navigate the streets around the school like a true hunter, silently recording information on his prey. He recalled the lessons from class. A liquefied beast's eyes glow at night, white for junior level and green for intermediate. Senior is blue, while top tier is red. Although he lacked experience, his judgment was likely accurate enough, and he soon discovered something troubling. Lately, the strength of these sky-stretch foxes generally ranged between intermediate and senior, roughly levels 19 to 25. However, after a few days, a massive doubt began to grow in his mind. He spotted another junior level while crouching in a corner, watching the eyes in the distance. That sky-stretch fox emitted a bright white light as it strolled boldly down the street. This made no sense at all. A junior liquefied beast, no matter how strange its abilities, shouldn't be able to hide from intermediate or senior awakeners. Level suppression is absolute, after all. It's as impossible as a primary schooler winning a feat of strength against a grown man. Yet, the fact remained, these junior monsters were running rampant and committing crimes in the streets, while the nearby experts acted as if they were blind. In all of this, there had to be a key piece of intelligence he was missing. He glanced at the junior fox before vanishing into the deeper shadows. He now had a rough map in his head, centered around the school, across the 16 nearby streets. At least 50 sky-stretch foxes were entrenched. The strongest outside was likely above level 25, but the one posing as a teacher inside, that one was likely nearing level 30. He didn't even dare use his appraisal skill on that monster. A beast-like intuition warned him against it. He felt certain that if he dared to peer into its secrets, he would be dead the next second. This wasn't a mere hallucination. The monster wearing Luo Shiyu's face was at an absurdly high level, perhaps even a top-tier alienated beast. He finally had enough intel. Back in the dorm, he did push-ups on the cold floor. As sweat dripped, his mind raced. Acting alone was clearly a suicide mission. But these monsters' abilities are far too sinister. Even the low-level ones can deceive high-ranking awakeners. Without proof, who would believe him? The only way forward was to obtain a carcass as evidence. Only with physical proof could he hope to convince the true power players. However, hunting a sky-stretch fox was like kicking a hornet's nest. He had no certainty that he could survive the encounter and return alive. It all came back to the same problem. He was still too weak. He gritted his teeth and ordered himself to do 500 more sit-ups. Over these past few days, he had been absorbing the energy of 2 contract gems daily. His potential was rising, and his body was growing stronger. Yet, a new talent had yet to emerge. The only thing keeping him from despair was the tangible sense of daily progress. The next morning, we see him open his eyes even earlier than before. It was 4 in the morning, and the sky was still a void of pitch black. The only sound on the playground was his heavy breathing as he ran. The wind was cold, and for a moment, he felt as if he were back in his past life. He suddenly ordered himself to stop running and act freely. He walked back and picked up an object, a dark, obsidian-colored ring. The craftsmanship was incredibly fine, with patterns both eerie and beautiful. This was no cheap trinket. He tried to appraise it, but the skill failed. It failed again. Deep down, he knew that ordinary items were appraised almost instantly, yet this object resisted him repeatedly. He became determined, spamming the appraisal skill relentlessly. After a dozen failures, the information finally surfaced. Success. The assassination ring. Once worn, all living beings would subconsciously ignore the wearer, though high-level awakeners remained immune. The moment the appraisal succeeded, a series of images crashed violently into his mind. An old man with a white beard held the ring in one hand. His other hand was pressed against a bound man. As a golden light flashed, the man let out a silent wail as his essence was drained into the ring. The vision shifted to the playground, where a man in white wearing a black mask was locked in combat with the monster wearing Luo Shiyu's face. But he was no match for her. He was swiftly defeated, his energy core destroyed in an instant, and then the vision vanished. He understood everything now, and a cold sweat broke out across his skin. This ring was likely a lure left behind by the sky-stretch fox. He looked up sharply toward the girls' dormitory, but all was silent. He forced himself to stay calm and made a split-second decision. He quietly slipped the ring onto his finger. To throw it away now would be even more suspicious while his Nightwalker effect was still active. He realized he had to get back to the dormitory immediately. Turning around, he vanished into the night, leaving the playground behind. Near a corner outside the fence, a yawning sky-stretch fox suddenly felt something was wrong. It rubbed its eyes, realizing the ring was gone. The creature leaped onto the field, pressing its nose to the ground to frantically sniff for a trail. But amidst the chaotic scents, it subconsciously ignored the young man's presence entirely. After a fruitless search, the fox was stunned. It seemed as if no one had been there at all. It had been watching all night under Luo Xiu's orders. How could a ring just evaporate? Someone had to have taken it, someone capable of hiding from a fox. The creature narrowed its long, slit-like eyes, suspecting a high-level awakener, and bolted toward the girls' dormitory. Meanwhile, we see him standing on the boys' dormitory balcony, watching the fox retreat. He finally let out a breath. His gamble had paid off. It was 4 a.m, and since his presence was already naturally faint, the ring had pushed his stealth to the absolute limit. However, he knew he couldn't wear it during the day. A monster of Luo Xiu's caliber would surely see through the trick. He wasn't the only one hunting. Returning to his room, he fiddled with the ring. That man in white from his vision had clearly been hunting these monsters as well. The vision proved there was magical equipment out there. He decided he needed to check the market prices for such gear soon, then glanced at the clock. It was 5 a.m, time for exactly 1 hour of sleep. He ordered his body to rest and plummeted into a deep slumber instantly. Suddenly, through a hazy fog, he saw Su Jingyao. Her figure was blurred, but her clear eyes looked at him with desperate urgency. She warned him of danger, telling him to wake up. This was no ordinary dream. He snapped his eyes open, and without a second of hesitation, he took off the ring and swallowed it whole. To be honest, it wasn't the most pleasant solution, but he closed his eyes and went back to sleep. A few minutes later, the dormitory door was pushed open silently. Luo Xiu walked in, pacing through the room as if inspecting her own territory. She stopped right beside his bed and leaned down. Her disguised face was so close he could have felt her breath if she were actually human. As the balcony wind ruffled the edges of her human mask, those narrow, predatory fox eyes peered out from behind the skin, scrutinizing him. Her sharp claws slowly extended, stopping less than a centimeter from his temple. He could even smell the faint, metallic scent of old energy clinging to her talons. After a tense moment of silence, she finally retracted her claws and turned to leave, vanishing back into the hallway. Another sky-stretch fox asked in a low whisper why she didn't just finish him, but Luo Xiu only gave her a cold glance, stating it wasn't him. She warned the creature not to waste food, causing it to shut its mouth instantly. Luo Xiu looked back one last time at the room. As he lay there appearing fast asleep, she and her subordinates vanished down the hallway. Half an hour later, he bolted upright, heart pounding wildly. That had been far too close for comfort. He glanced out the window, and only after confirming they were truly gone did he finally breathe again. He had ordered his body to sleep, but his mind had remained wide awake. The moment she entered the room, he understood everything. His failure to appear at the playground at 5 had been an anomaly that sparked suspicion. Against a monster of her speed and power, he wouldn't have lasted a single move. He had to gamble. Gamble that she didn't know he had the ring, and gamble that she had no appetite for someone with such low potential. Once again, he had won. Training was too slow. He realized he desperately needed better equipment. Sitting on the edge of the bed, he felt a cold shiver. He never wanted to feel like a helpless fish on a chopping block ever again. To avoid looking suspicious, he forced himself to go to the cafeteria, where he immediately heard everyone discussing the same shocking news. Black Death Star had fallen. He was Pearl City's most notorious mercenary, a man rumored to be willing to assassinate even a city lord for the right price. We see him eating breakfast while listening intently to the gossip. Apparently, the remains had been discovered early this morning. The body was found in a ditch near the school, mangled by beasts, with his white clothes covered in strange golden marks. The black mask on his face had been shattered into pieces. His heart skipped a beat. White clothes and a black mask. Could it be the man from the vision? This meant the ally he thought he had last night was actually just a mercenary for hire. But that raised a new question. If Luo Xiu was an orphan just like him, who would spend a fortune to hire Black Death Star to deal with her? Unless, of course, someone else had also discovered these disguised monsters and decided on a simple, brutal solution: pay a professional to eliminate the beast. His expression turned thoughtful. It was actually a brilliant plan. No need for evidence or convincing anyone, as long as you had the money. A mercenary wouldn't care if the target was human or monster. Unfortunately, he had failed and only alerted the enemy. After finishing breakfast, he returned to the dorm to train regardless. He condensed a contract gem and began absorbing its energy when suddenly, a strange sensation took hold. The wondrous sensation of all things sublimation erupted from within him. He froze for a moment, wondering if this was a new talent manifesting. He immediately performed an appraisal on himself. Success: Summoned Beast, Zhang Ping. Potential: 4 stars. Rank: Junior Awakened. Level 2. Talent: Stable Appraisal. It turns out his skill had simply leveled up, a realization that filled him with sudden joy. The appraisal skill had shifted from unstable to stable, and it now displayed levels. This meant, quite simply, that things were changing. He could now see through the levels of those monsters, even in broad daylight. This was a critical upgrade. Today was turning out to be a good day. To celebrate, he decided on 2,000 push-ups. He smiled and began to warm up, noting that as his level rose, his physical and mental strength had both increased by about 5%. It wasn't much, but every bit counted. As night fell, he donned his assassination ring. He left the school. Between his night walker trait and the ring, he was now a literal ghost. We see him stop at a street corner, where he activated his appraisal on a Skystretch Fox inside a shop. Success: Liquefied Beast, Skystretch Fox. Rank: Ultimate Liquefied Beast. Level 15. It worked. Now that he had a baseline, he began wandering the area, memorizing the level data of every Skystretch Fox he encountered. Half an hour later, he arrived at a weapon shop called Soul of Iron. He had been eyeing this place because the owner was actually human. Furthermore, the customers were mostly adventurers, marginalized groups of orphans just like him. Entering here wouldn't raise any suspicions whatsoever. After observing for a while, he stepped inside when the shop was empty. A wave of heat hit him, coming from a massive furnace at the back. A thin old man leaned against the wall, puffing away on a long pipe without even lifting an eyelid. Zhang Ping ignored him in return. He began browsing the weapons on display. A 9-ring ghost axe was priced at 500,000. A ghost lotus blade was 600,000. Suddenly, his eyes lit up. A weapon with a wild, blood-white design, resembling a traditional spring-embroidered saber, lay there quietly. The Cold Frost Country Blade, 1.88 meters long, weighing 80 pounds, forged from the essence of a frost leopard. Its attacks carried a natural chill. It was a magnificent blade. His blood raced as he looked at the price tag, but then his heart felt as though the blade had sliced right through it. 2 million pearl coins. He did the math. An ordinary farmer would have to work for 666 years, without eating, to afford it. His heart went cold. He knew these things were expensive, but he hadn't expected this level of absurdity. "Old gentleman," he said, turning around. Realizing even the cheapest items cost tens of thousands, Zhang Ping swallowed his pride and approached the old man to ask if there was anything more affordable. The old man took a slow, lingering puff of his pipe. A full minute and a half passed before he finally lifted his cloudy eyelids to look at him. He asked Zhang Ping what he had said, forcing our protagonist to repeat himself. "Sir, I was wondering, do you have any cheaper weapons?" The old man stared as if his brain had a half-century delay before giving an answer that had nothing to do with the question. "My son is waiting for dinner." Zhang Ping was utterly speechless. Just then, a middle-aged, muscular man rushed inside, wearing tattered camouflage and sporting a massive, inverted triangle physique. His arms were thicker than Zhang Ping's thighs, and he carried a pitch-black giant sword on his back, clearly a seasoned veteran of the wasteland. "Sorry, little brother, the shop is closed for now," the man said, putting down his weapon. The old man, however, looked at him with immediate dissatisfaction. "Cho Chang, where are you taking Dashin now?" he grumbled. Cho Chang looked pained as he replied, "Uncle Lu, why did you open the shop again? I told you to wait for me at home. I'll find Dashin soon." The old man swung his pipe at Cho Chang's head, cursing him for being useless. "All you do is mess around. Tell Dashin to come home for dinner." Cho Chang nodded repeatedly, promising he would find him right away. When Cho Chang suggested they go upstairs, the old man hit him again, insisting he stay in case a regular customer arrived. Cho Chang could only sigh and yield. He promised the old man they wouldn't go anywhere. Suddenly, his eyes lit up as he noticed Zhang Ping trying to slip away. "A student," he called out. "Want to be an adventurer, little brother?" "Wait," he called out to stop him. Zhang Ping turned back, wondering what this was all about. Cho Chang forced a flattering smile, and after a moment of hesitation, Zhang Ping nodded. The two of them stepped outside the shop to talk. Cho Chang habitually offered a cigarette, but Zhang Ping waved it away. "Almost graduated, right?" the man asked, tucking the cigarette behind his ear. Zhang Ping nodded, confirming he was close. Cho Chang then asked cautiously, "What do you think of this Iron Frontier business?" Zhang Ping immediately caught his drift. He glanced at the senile old man inside and played along, saying it was certainly better than being a farmer. Exactly, better than being a farmer. Cho Chang felt he'd found a kindred spirit. In this world, being a farmer wasn't just about growing crops. They repaired roads, patched walls, and handled the city's waste. Every dirty job imaginable. "Brother, what are you getting at?" Zhang Ping asked. He pointed back toward the shop. Seeing that Zhang Ping was sharp, Cho Chang decided to lay his cards on the table. "That's my uncle, my real uncle, his son." Cho Chang explained that his cousin, Dashin, had gone missing recently, leaving Uncle Lu confused and in need of someone to watch the shop. He offered to teach Zhang Ping some combat moves in his spare time, promising he'd be ready for the wasteland soon. Think about it, free room and board. On top of that, he offered 100 yuan monthly salary. Zhang Ping was tempted, but he cautiously told the man he would give his answer tomorrow. He knew that the missing Dashin had likely been consumed by the lake fox, and while the dorms were dangerous, the wet rain monster only targeted girls, making it relatively safe for boys. However, after that morning's room inspection, his sense of security had dropped to zero. "All right, think it over," Cho Chang said, suddenly pressing a dagger into Zhang Ping's hand as a gesture of friendship. He warned him that the city had become unstable lately and to stay sharp. With that, he turned back into the shop, leaving Zhang Ping to his thoughts. As he walked, he instinctively drew the blade. The moment the sheath opened, a cold light flashed, causing his pupils to contract in surprise. The material was identical to that 2 million yuan sword, the Cold Lady. The blade was translucent white and radiated a bone-chilling frost. This was an incredibly heavy gift. He realized then that betting his life on a monster's specific taste and victims was a fool's errand. What if the wet rain decided to change its diet one day? He decided right then to accept the job tomorrow, still admiring the dagger. He even gave the weapon a name, Beauty. As he headed back, he began to visualize himself using the blade in a real fight. Passing a park, he suddenly froze. There, sitting on a swing, was a meter-tall lake fox, a creature that shouldn't be here. His appraisal skill confirmed it, a level 3 mutated beast, a lake fox. It was weak, very weak, and yet his heart began to race uncontrollably. This was the evidence he needed. If he killed it and brought the remains to the investigation team, he could expose the truth. Perhaps Pearl City could still be saved. He couldn't stand watching his classmates be hunted like prey while he walked the streets. Pretending not to see the monsters committing these atrocities, he turned, his hand gripping the hilt of Beauty with newfound resolve. They say a weapon breeds the will to use it. Without this dagger, he never would have found the courage to step into that park. But just as he entered, a hand clamped down on his shoulder. "Don't move," a woman's voice whispered, accompanied by a piercing chill from behind. Ice. She was an ice type awakened. His racing heart went cold as he realized there was no killing intent. "Don't look back," she commanded. "Don't speak. Take this and leave," the woman whispered, pressing a small note into Zhang Ping's hand before vanishing an instant later. Just like that, the bone-chilling cold at his back disappeared into the night. He hurried back to the dorms with a racing heart, choosing to rest rather than read the note immediately. At 4 a.m., he woke up right on schedule. He retreated to the bathroom and sat down before slowly unfolding the paper, which contained only 3 cryptic phrases: 23rd, 5 Lien, and Nanyue. He frowned at the words. The 23rd was only 4 days away, clearly a meeting time, but 5 Lien and Nanyue made no sense at all. His head began to ache. This code was obviously designed to bypass the lake fox's detection. Later that afternoon, he sat filling out his graduation application. Suddenly, a flash of inspiration hit him. What if he read the clues in a different context? He remembered a broken sign where the word "nin" looked like "you" in a small park behind a ramen shop where he used to practice martial arts. That shop had closed 4 years ago, and barely 5 people knew that secret. Satisfied, he tore the note to pieces and flushed it away. He grabbed his completed application and walked out. The process was smooth. After all, no one pays much attention to an ordinary student. By evening, he had packed his bags and headed straight to the Iron Soul shop. When Cho Chang saw him with his luggage, his face lit up. "Little brother, your timing is perfect. I have a mission tomorrow, and I'll be gone for about 5 days. Cho Chang had been worried about leaving Uncle Lu alone, so he enthusiastically led Zhang Ping to the 2nd floor to pick out a room. He learned that Uncle Lu's full name was Lu Taifeng, and he was 79 years old. That night, the training began. Cho Chang decided to teach him some basics. "Watch closely, Zhang," he said, pulling on fireproof gloves and standing before the furnace. Zhang Ping focused intensely as Cho Chang placed several iron ingots and crimson snake scales into a wooden tray. One piece of gold iron costs 6,000 yuan. Expensive? Perhaps, but each one carries the sweat of miners and adventurers, Cho Chang noted solemnly. These red refining snake scales could fuse with iron under high heat, giving weapons self-repairing properties, but the molding had to be perfect on the first try. Otherwise, the materials would be wasted. With that, he tossed the entire tray into the furnace and reached his bare hands directly into the flames. He began stirring the molten mass like dough, the fire licking his arms, yet he didn't even flinch. Now, pay attention to the most critical step. With a sudden, powerful shout, he pulled a glowing, crimson mass of molten metal from the fire and quickly pressed it into a rectangular mold. He grabbed a heavy hammer and began striking the mold's protrusions with rhythmic fury, shouting for Zhang Ping to bring over the red oil. Zhang Ping exerted every ounce of his strength to drag the meter-high oil barrel over, earning a small, approving smile from Cho Chang. Cho Chang twisted the cap and poured the oil onto the mold, causing a loud boom as steam erupted before he finally pulled the mold apart. A dark combat blade with distinct red veins appeared, and Cho Chang swung it violently toward a nearby slab of testing stone. The blade flashed, slicing the hard stone cleanly in two. This, we learn, was the Mingzhu blade, the city's most common standard-issue weapon. Zhang Ping was utterly stunned by the display, yet he quickly realized that even a city with such technology was still riddled with holes from infiltration. He wondered if such a blade could even wound a high-level beast, a question that only made Cho Chang chuckle softly. Cho Chang admitted it worked on low-level threats, but for anything stronger, one would need luck. Then, he handed Zhang Ping the fireproof gloves. Zhang Ping took a deep breath, donned the gloves, and stepped forward to place the raw materials into the furnace just as he had been shown. A terrifying wave of heat hit him instantly, singeing his eyebrows, but Cho Chang warned him not to retreat and to feel the materials changing. Gritting his teeth, Zhang Ping reached his hands into the flames and grasped the scalding mass, beginning the difficult process of kneading it. He soon discovered this was 10,000 times harder than kneading dough, requiring every bit of strength he possessed to mix the materials. Sweat soaked his back instantly as Cho Chang urged him to hurry before the materials burned away. Finally, the mass felt unified. He pulled it out and stuffed it into the mold, but when he reached for the heavy hammer, he found it was absurdly heavy. Using both hands, he barely managed to lift it, striking with all his might until the mold was flat enough to pour the oil over. Steam exploded with a roar, and Zhang Ping finally collapsed to the floor, completely exhausted as Cho Chang offered him some water. He downed the water in one gulp while Cho Chang watched him with a new sense of genuine admiration in his eyes. Cho Chang remarked that the school teachers must be blind, as Zhang's resilience was more than enough for the top 3 universities. Wiping his mouth, Zhang Ping finally asked the question that had been bothering him for days regarding the patrol and investigation teams. Zhang Ping asked what that mysterious third organization was called, but Uncle Cho simply spread his hands with a look that said he truly didn't know. He explained that Mingzhu City had been like this since the beginning. Everyone knew a third group existed, but its name and purpose remained a total mystery. Zhang Ping stood there stunned, realizing that the entire city was playing a game of hide-and-seek. He had assumed his own lack of knowledge was the problem. As it turned out, no one had ever seen them. Uncle Cho figured it was likely some secret assassination department and told him not to worry about it. Uncle Cho slapped the mold and asked if he had rested enough to see his first creation. Zhang Ping stood up, his palms slick with nervous sweat. At Cho Chang's gesture, Zhang Ping grabbed the lever and pulled hard. Suddenly, a strange, eerie silver light flickered from within the mold. His brow furrowed as he looked at Uncle Cho, certain he had failed. Cho Chang simply shrugged and lifted the newly forged blade. The blade was covered in messy silver threads, looking like a total disaster compared to the beautiful red veins of a standard Mingzhu blade. Cho Chang walked to the testing block and swung. The blade flashed, but the stone remained untouched while the sword itself suddenly snapped in two. The tip of the blade flew off and stuck firmly to a nearby magnet. Cho Chang told him to clean it up, his voice betraying no emotion. Staring at the broken edge, Zhang Ping realized the furnace's heat had roasted him like a pig, causing his strength to fail during the final steps. Because his movements had been so messy, the forging was a failure. After that, Uncle Cho sat him down to explain his mistakes. He broke down every single error in Zhang Ping's technique. To be honest, this practical lesson was 10,000 times better than school theory. Then, a painful question occurred to Zhang Ping. He asked Uncle Cho exactly how much money he had just lost on that failed batch. Uncle Cho sighed and said it was about 60,000. Zhang Ping's heart sank and his face turned pale. He couldn't afford that even if he sold himself. Seeing the boy's terror, Uncle Cho suddenly burst into laughter, slapping his thigh and admitting he was only joking about the cost. He promised to teach him how to recycle the scrap later, noting that if Zhang had succeeded on his first try, even Dashin would have to call him senior. Before he could finish laughing, Grandpa Lu's tobacco pipe landed with a precise thwack on his forehead, making Cho Chang wince in pain. Grandpa Lu's eyes cleared for a moment as he noted the boy's talent was greater than Dashin's, before he drifted back into confusion, asking where Dashin was. Uncle Cho sighed and patted Zhang Ping's shoulder with a heavy expression, telling him to look after the old man before he hurried away. Zhang Ping nodded, realizing that while Uncle Cho had a bit of a big mouth, he still spent 10 minutes nagging him before finally leaving. With only the sound of the furnace remaining, Zhang Ping poured a cup of water and approached the old man, but Grandpa Lu ignored him. The old man smoked in silence until he suddenly looked up, his eyes as sharp as a drawn blade, and told Zhang Ping to set the cup down. Confirming that Cho Chang was gone, Grandpa Lu revealed he wasn't actually senile, calmly stating that he knew something had happened to Dashin. He explained that he only played the fool to keep Cho Chang from investigating and getting killed. As long as Cho had someone to worry about, he would stay safe like a turtle in its shell. Zhang Ping was stunned by the old man's calculated wisdom, the mark of a true veteran. When asked if he feared Zhang Ping would tell the truth, the old man just smiled. Zhang Ping could only shake his head and promise he wouldn't. Grandpa Lu exhaled a smoke ring, noting that Cho was too impatient, and decided that over the next few days, he would teach Zhang the true Lu family technique. He refused to let the family craft die with him. The next morning at 4 o'clock, Zhang Ping found Grandpa Lu already waiting in the studio. The old man tossed him a basin of actual flour and told him to get to work. To be honest, it looked more like a trap than a lesson. The flour was filled with hundreds of iron beads of various sizes. Zhang Ping had to wear a blindfold and knead every single one of them out. The goal was to distinguish flour clumps from iron beads by touch alone. Without a word, Zhang Ping masked his eyes and began the grueling task. The flour was dense and the beads were painful to handle, but he calmed his mind, focusing every ounce of his attention on his fingertips. He spent the entire morning battling the dough. By afternoon, the old man began teaching him the properties of rare materials, like red snake scales. He learned how the scales released heat and self-repaired, and how to strike their weak points. These were life-saving secrets, and he learned them fast. He studied harder than he ever had in his previous life. Soon, it was late on the 22nd, the night before his mysterious meeting. He decided to scout the park in advance. Slipping on his assassination ring, he climbed out the window like a ghost, completely invisible to the world. At the entrance, Hu from the Tianchong sect, the man assigned to watch him, was staring blankly at a sign, completely unaware that his target had just slipped away right under his nose. 10 minutes later, we see him reach the park. The trees cast long, dancing shadows across what should have been an empty, peaceful space. Instead, the park felt cold and sinister. Suddenly, Zhang Ping felt a pair of eyes watching him from the darkness, and he spun around instantly. His hand was already resting on the hilt of his blade as a creature the size of an adult cat, covered in stiff bristles, crawled out from the bushes. The identification was successful. It was a level 5 liquefied beast, an armored poison rat, possessing the toxic camouflage talent. His heart sank. A level 2 facing a level 5 was a grim prospect, especially since one prick from that venomous tail would mean the end of him. But Zhang Ping didn't back down, thinking of the orphans who might be hurt tomorrow if he fled. After all, power often brings a certain lethal resolve. He lunged forward with the explosive force of a hunting leopard, but the rat was incredibly cunning, sensing his blade aimed directly for its eyes. The beast curled into a ball, using its momentum to spin and deflect the force of the blow as Zhang Ping's dagger scraped against its bristly back. The strike produced the jarring sound of metal on metal, and failing to find its mark, he instantly retreated as the creature sprang back toward him. Its venomous tail lashed out like a steel whip, striking repeatedly at his knees while he backed away, cold sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. This was 10,000 times more exhausting than a school track run, so he suddenly stopped, shifted his grip, and dropped into a heavy horse stance. Using the fist of the chasing rat technique, he accelerated again, watching as the rat's tail coiled toward his wrist like a striking viper. With a sudden roar, he dropped his center of gravity, a feint that bypassed the beast's defense as his left hand shot out like a lightning bolt. The punch landed squarely on the rat's forehead, the strange force dazing the creature just as his blade transformed into a streak of white light. The dagger plunged through the eye socket, piercing its vitals. Even as it died, the beast tried to sting him, but he leaped aside just in time. He watched as the remains twitched twice on the ground before going still, leaving him gasping for air amidst a pool of glowing golden liquid. It was fortunate that it was night, as his Night Walker speed bonus had truly saved his life. A few minutes later, he vanished into the dark. Soon after, two women appeared by the carcass, one in a light green military uniform and the other wearing a mask of chilling ice. The woman in uniform picked up the rat's remains, wondering aloud if the person who did this was a man or perhaps something more cunning. After a brief exchange, the two of them collected what was left of the beast and quickly disappeared into the night. The next morning, before dawn, Zhang Ping decided to attempt the living dough forging once more to craft a contract gem, tossing the rare materials into the roaring furnace. This time he was mentally prepared, gritting his teeth against the searing waves of heat, until a sudden, sharp pain erupted in his stomach. He couldn't help but gasp in shock, and as he did, the furnace flames suddenly surged like a fire snake, being sucked right in. The fire vanished into his nose, sending a warm current down his throat and into his stomach, making him feel instantly revitalized. A new talent had awakened, he realized with a start, though he didn't stop working as old Lu watched him from the side. The old man glanced at him without a word before finally speaking, noting the temperature was too low and he needed more wood. Zhang Ping quickly freed a hand to stoke the fire, and after a bit of frantic scrambling, he finally managed to press the materials into the mold. He collapsed onto the floor and immediately checked his status panel to find a new talent, Fire Eater, allowing him to recover stamina by consuming flames. It also converted excess fire into elemental energy stored within his body, a process that would gradually increase his resistance to high temperatures. He noticed right away that his potential had dropped from 4 stars to 3, a detail in the notes that made everything clear. Potential was simply the untapped treasure within his body, and through the contract gems, he could mine it infinitely, a path with no end. However, he was still just a beginner. Any high-level awakened could easily crush him into the dirt without a second thought. Unsurprisingly, his second forging attempt failed as well, so he simply sat by the furnace, treating the flames like an all-you-can-eat buffet. He kept inhaling the fire, adding more wood whenever the glow dimmed, and then inhaling again. Half an hour later, he felt completely full. A warm energy flowed through his veins, and with a single thought, that power obeyed him like a loyal puppy. It concentrated instantly in his fist, a sensation so exhilarating he could hardly believe it. This was his first truly controllable superpower. By evening, he could make a small flame dance around his fingertips, a trick that was not only cool, but also a great shield against the cold. This gave him a bit more confidence for his upcoming meeting, so after a quick meal, he made sure old Lu was asleep before heading out. Slipping on his ring, he vanished into the night, finding a quiet corner in the deathly silent park to start digging while he waited. As he continued to practice with the fire element inside him, a black circle suddenly appeared beneath his feet before he could even react. He fell straight through, a terrifying sense of weightlessness taking over as he struggled desperately against the surrounding darkness. He even burned through the soles of his shoes in his panic, but he couldn't stop the descent until, 30 seconds later, he hit the ground with a thud. Zhang Ping found himself trapped, his body encased in a thick, black viscous liquid that left only his head exposed. "You have 5 minutes to prove you are human," a voice commanded. Looking up, we see the source of that cold voice, the woman in white wearing the ice mask. The ice arrow in her hand was already pressed firmly against his throat. As she demanded proof of his humanity, his mind raced. He realized then that perhaps they had no way of identifying the monsters hiding within the city. The woman remained silent, but her stillness gave him the answer he needed. They knew monsters were among them, but they didn't know who they were. And that, as it turned out, was a very dangerous problem for everyone involved. With no other choice, he desperately spammed his appraisal skill on her. Failure, failure, another failure, though his proficiency was at least climbing. He began to wonder if his ability was simply broken, but finally, after 2 tense minutes, the information surfaced. Success at last. Her name was Lu Sishan, a level 21 high-level awakened. He gasped inwardly. She was incredibly powerful, a true force to be reckoned with. Even as a high-level awakened, her potential still sat at 5 stars, but he had no time to admire her stats as he frantically searched his memories. Lu Sishan. The name didn't ring a bell. 1 minute left. Her voice rang out like a death knell, sending him into a complete panic. He began shouting every girl's name the original owner of his body had ever known. Lu Cici, Lu Xiaoxiao, Lu Pinping, but she told him that proved nothing. Sishan coldly interrupted him, noting that such data could be easily uncovered by the Sky Lake organization if they looked. He stared at her, desperate for a lead. Suddenly, a spark of inspiration hit him, and he decided to gamble. Cici and Sishan were only one character apart. He locked eyes with her, hoping for a miracle. Word by word, he recounted a memory. Cici, do you remember? When you fell into the river as a child, I was the one who pulled you out. He mentioned being punished by the director for 3 days and keeping the stone she gave him, but she didn't react. His mind continued to race for more. He searched every corner of his mind for any lingering regrets or secrets involving that girl named Lu Cici. Then, he remembered something truly specific. It was a foolish thing that only the two of them could possibly know. Despite the embarrassment, he decided to go for broke and shouted out. He recited the ridiculous secret. First is this, second is that, third is the earth-shattering Cici invincible punch. Instantly, the air seemed to freeze solid. Behind that icy mask, her composure finally shattered like glass. With a gentle wave of her hand, the ice arrow at his throat melted away. It vanished into a puddle of clear water. Is it really you, Sister Cici? He asked tentatively, though she did not remove her mask. Her voice softened considerably as she moved to the second question, asking why his behavior had been so unusual lately, if his ability was truly the useless gem. He offered a half-truth, claiming he had absorbed the gem's energy, which caused her to pause in genuine surprise at the idea of him absorbing it himself. He explained that after the absorption, his mind became clear, leading him to discover 2 monsters hiding right inside the school. Lu Sishan's tone grew heavy with seriousness as she asked if he could accurately identify every monster in the city, but he quickly turned the tables. He asked if they truly didn't know what these monsters were, and her silence told him everything. They were essentially flying blind. Deciding to add fuel to the fire, he revealed that the hidden monsters were sky-stretch foxes, creatures capable of distorting cognition and subverting common sense. He warned her that with the school as the center, every street held over 30 of them, and the patrol teams had already been completely wiped out. He noted that not a single soul was left alive, sensing the expression behind her mask turn incredibly grim as he offered to share the identities he'd recorded. Suggesting they verify the information themselves, he laid down his final chips, naming the Wanshang breakfast shop on Lei Street as a starting point. He exposed the landlady there as a fox, along with the owner of Joan Furniture and the 3 blacksmiths at the Longxiang workshop on Longzhu Street. He told her to investigate first before they spoke further, adding a final, stinging suggestion that she check her own organization for moles as well. Lu Sishan remained silent for a moment before telling him to stay put while she returned, to which he dryly gestured at his encased body. As he gave a helpless shrug, we shift to a secret room where a silver-haired elder stands before a glowing badge. The elder listened to Lu Sishan's report regarding the sky-stretch foxes and looked around the room, asking if anyone had heard of such a creature. A middle-aged man suggested they might be descendants of the illusion and seasonal foxes, a theory a muscular man nearby seemed to find plausible. Radiating an aura of pure violence, the man, Jean Bo, volunteered to verify the intel, prompting the elder to slam the table in approval. The elder ordered Jean Bo to lead a team and, if the information proved true, to bring back the remains of the creatures for study. Meanwhile, in a second-floor bedroom at the Wanshang breakfast shop, a 2-meter-tall fox was sleeping soundly until it suddenly bolted awake, too late. An iron fist appeared out of thin air without warning, striking the creature's energy core so cleanly that there was neither sound nor debris. The person sleeping nearby didn't even stop snoring as Jean Bo picked up the fox's remains and coldly gave the order to move out. At almost that exact same moment, back in the school dormitory, Luo Shiyu's eyes snapped open as he suddenly vanished, reappearing hundreds of meters in the air. Yuegyo has fallen, he muttered, his voice cold as ice, just before sensing another presence vanishing, yet another one gone, prompting a furious roar. That roar, filled with absolute rage, transformed into a terrifying shockwave that swept across half of Mingzhu City, startling countless creatures lurking in the darkness. The sky-stretch foxes were jolted awake, their human disguises fluttering like paper in the wind, but by then, Jinbo's team had already secured 2 corpses. We see them vanish beyond the city limits, and the moment they leave Mingzhu City, those 2 human bodies begin to twist and deform. They transformed into 2 massive foxes, a sight that caused Jinbo to flash a grim, satisfied smile. At last, they knew exactly what their enemy looked like. Back in the secret room, the badge in Lu Sishan's hand began to glow as the captain's voice came through, calling her name. He ordered her and Manny to protect Zhang Pin from the shadows, leaving his credibility to her judgment while promising full cooperation to identify every fox. Lu Sishan returned to the protagonist and released his restraints, having finally verified that his information was indeed accurate. As he stretched his stiff limbs, he asked for confirmation. She nodded, though she warned him he would remain an informant for now, just in case it was a trap. He offered a casual smile, feeling that being an informant was a small price to pay to stop these monsters, though one burning question remained. He looked her in the eye and asked why the city's high-level awakened couldn't see through such low-level disguises, prompting her to take a deep breath. She gave him an answer that made his skin crawl. There was likely a king-class liquid beast hiding somewhere within Mingzhu City. His eyes widened in shock at the mention of a king-class entity, and he asked if their side had anyone of that caliber. The answer was a simple no. A chill ran down his spine as he wondered how they could possibly fight such a thing, a question that left Lu Sishan in a heavy silence. Without a king of their own, they would have to rely on sheer numbers. The next day, he continued his training with Lu Taifeng, who spoke of the outlying villages. The old man puffed on his pipe, explaining that the people there were known as savages, people who worshipped monsters as gods. They captured the living as sacrifices, proving that in the wild, the people can be far more dangerous than the monsters themselves. The old man tossed him a dark, grim object, the claw of a corpse-eating dog, explaining it had properties that could be ground into a powder. Mixed with oil, it could create a weapon specifically designed to counter breath-based abilities, a gift that the young man carefully weighed in his hand. As Lu Taifeng exhaled a ring of smoke, he explained the difference between a corpse-eating dog and a normal one: black fur, red eyes, and a mouth full of human teeth. It was a concise description, though it likely conjured a rather ridiculous image of a dog wearing dentures in Zhang Pin's mind, making him nearly laugh out loud. He spent the entire morning training under the old man's guidance, and after lunch, we find him sitting by the stove with flames dancing in his palms. He began practicing his newly developed techniques, the flame palm and the flame blade, enjoying himself immensely as he tested his limits. He looked like a child with a brand new toy, until a soft, timid voice spoke up from behind him, asking for the price of a certain blade. He turned to see a delicate, almost feminine-looking young man pointing at a sword, prompting Zhang Pin to stand up and walk over to assist him. After a quick glance, he explained that this particular one wasn't for sale as it was a sample. The boy looked embarrassed, admitting he was just an apprentice. Zhang Pin shrugged, explaining he couldn't make that call, and as the boy walked away disappointed, he watched his back, feeling a strange sense of familiarity. He couldn't quite place the face, but he remembered the boy mentioning he trained at his family's martial arts hall, a place for the strong, surely. He decided he would head out that night to investigate, but the moment he climbed out of his window, he spotted a familiar figure in the shadows. It was Lu Sishan, her silhouette flickering through the alleyway. He followed immediately, only to feel the ground vanish beneath his feet a second later. The two of them reappeared in that familiar secret room, where she got straight to the point regarding the Skystretch Fox's ability to rationalize their attacks. To an outsider, their violence looks perfectly normal, so she insisted they needed a secret signal. Otherwise, she might not even realize he was being attacked. He frowned, realizing this was indeed a massive problem, remembering how Luo Shiyu's previous assault looked like a simple dinner invitation to everyone else. A single signal might not be enough, so after a moment of thought, he suggested several backups: a specific shout, a coin toss, or a subtle hand gesture. He could even touch his ring with his left index finger to signal an ambush. Lu Sishan nodded and handed him a wooden ring as a tool. He interrupted her to ask if it was fireproof, and when she shook her head, he gave a wry smile, knowing it wouldn't last a second in his hands. A ball of fire erupted in his palm, leaving Lu Sishan visibly stunned, as she realized his ability was far more than just a useless gem, as she had thought. He didn't offer a long explanation and simply extinguished the flame. She didn't pry, instead handing him a jade tablet she called the cold bath. She held the matching, warm bath piece, explaining that if his jade was heated by his flames, hers would grow hot, letting her know he was in trouble. With the plan finalized, we see him leave the secret room to begin a late-night stroll through the city, eventually finding a place called the Shuangquan Hall. It was a martial arts school, brightly lit and bustling with adventurers, and the moment he stepped inside, he was met with a warm welcome. A young woman in a training uniform greeted him with a professional smile, asking how she could help while he scanned a nearby flyer. The prices were, to put it mildly, astronomical. Nearly 10,000 coins for a secret technique, causing him to click his tongue in disbelief. He knew a place like this was usually out of reach for someone of his means, but thanks to the funding he'd secured from Lu Sishan, he had a chance. After paying the fee, he was finally able to step into the inner training hall, where he found himself surrounded by a crowd of older apprentices. Most of them looked to be in their late 20s, making him feel quite out of place until a boy his own age approached him. The boy introduced himself as Wang Jiaming, and after Zhang Pin gave a simple nod in return, their instructor finally made his appearance. He was a man in his 40s named Baida, whose muscles were so well-defined they looked almost like polished stones, a true veteran, clearly. He announced they would begin with the Yuan Wang style, and as the lesson started, Zhang Pin followed the movements with natural ease. He mastered the basics almost instantly, but beside him, poor Wang Jiaming was struggling, failing to get the same move right even after 10 corrections. Baida shouted, asking if the boy's feet were even attached to his body, as he wiped sweat from his brow in complete exasperation. The instructor glanced between the two of them before suddenly ordering them to spar, prompting them to take their places in the center of the room. The moment the signal was given, Zhang Pin moved like a blur, feinting and then weaving around the boy's guard with monkey-like agility. He landed a light punch on the boy's face, a movement so fluid and rapid that the other students barely saw what had happened. Wang Jiaming hadn't even realized the fight had started before it was over, leading a disappointed Baida to call an end to the session. Despite the dismissal, the boy begged to stay for just a few more days, leaving Zhang Pin wondering why someone so untalented would persist so hard. Driven by curiosity, he quietly activated his appraisal skill on the boy, only to find that Wang Jiaming's profile was quite unusual. He possessed 7-star potential and a talent called emotional capture, though it came with a staggering 90% penalty to his learning speed. However, his growth rate would increase by 10% for every single day he persisted, proving that for him, hard work really was a superpower. A maximum growth of 1,000%, good heavens. He realized that with 7-star potential and emotional capture, this boy was anything but a failure. In fact, he was a hidden powerhouse in the making. As long as he got his foot in the door and persisted, his growth would become terrifying. Zhang Pin decided right then that this boy was a rare talent, even if Jiaming was currently red-faced and sweating without having mastered a single move. By contrast, our protagonist had managed to grasp the basics of the Yuan Wang style just by listening in from the sidelines. A little later, as the two of them walked back to the city together, Zhang Pin learned that the boy was actually a runaway from an elite upbringing. Wang Jiaming laughed heartily, promising to practice again tomorrow, completely unaware that he was destined to be a late-game monster. Returning home, Zhang Pin climbed through his window, but the moment his feet hit the floor, he sensed the atmosphere in the room was off. Lu Sishan was already there, sitting expressionless at his desk, prompting him to joke that she was going to give him a heart attack. He closed the window tightly as she spoke in a cold, anxious tone, informing him that the purge operation had run into serious trouble. Someone had been badly injured because a target named Chang who possessed a strange ability to inspire trust, something Zhang Pin hadn't mentioned. He immediately shook his head in denial, insisting the targets he identified weren't like that. Perhaps they had swapped identities or a prophet was interfering. She told him she would investigate and warned him to be careful before her figure flickered and vanished like a drop of water in the ocean. Looking at the now empty room, he couldn't help but mutter a small complaint about her dramatic exits, which, to be fair, were quite efficient. By the time Saturday morning arrived, he had finished his routine of famous fist techniques and practiced the new Yuan Wang style twice over. After a quick trip to the market, we see him return to the shop, ready to begin another day of dedicated forging practice. Old man Lu took him through the materials room, pointing out a deep blue finger preserved in a jar, a trophy from a sea person. He reminisced about how those monsters tried to invade 60 years ago when he was just a recruit fighting alongside the city lord. Zhang Pin stared curiously at the greenish finger, learning that these hybrids from the sea worshipped a sea god and hated land dwellers. The old man snorted before pulling out a feather as red as fresh blood, identifying it as a firebird feather. This, he explained, was a true treasure that could ignite during flight, making it a nearly unstoppable hidden weapon if one could craft it. On the market, a single one costs 50,000 pearl coins, if you can even find it. Zhang Pin stared at that feather, his heart itching with desire. He imagined crafting a blade from these feathers. Combined with his fire seer talent, he'd essentially have a weapon with infinite fuel. A dream come true, really. By the afternoon, as closing time arrived and old man Lu went upstairs to rest, the front door was suddenly kicked open with a violent bang. Xiao Chang burst in, weighed down by bags and swearing under his breath, smelling of a pungent mix of dirt and raw energy fluctuations. The scent was noticeable from 3 meters away as he slumped onto a stool by the counter, his mouth still spewing frustrated insults. It was clear he'd been through hell in the wilderness. Zhang Pin hurried over to ask what happened, and Xiao Chang simply rolled up his sleeve. Several fresh, unhealed wolf claw marks scarred his arm. He spat on the ground in anger, cursing his luck. To be honest, he looked lucky to be alive. He explained that the northern forests were crawling with liquefied wolves, and he'd nearly been finished off while covering a retreat, only to run into savages. They had attacked with wind blades immediately, forcing him to abandon his prized escape shovel. As he spoke, he pulled something shimmering from his coat. It was a crystal glowing with a vibrant emerald light, a wind gem. Zhang Pin's eyes widened. He couldn't look away from the rare treasure. Qiu Chang proudly explained he'd pried it off a savage's weapon as a bit of revenge, before handing it over for Zhang Pin to examine. He told the boy that the city was full of fakes, and seeing the real thing would prevent him from being cheated later. Zhang Pin took it carefully. The very moment the gem touched his palm, a sharp chime echoed in his ears, followed immediately by a strange sensation. A flood of chaotic voices rushed into his mind like a tide, whispering about the fall of Moon 12 and a burning hatred for humans. The voices were a confusing jumble of threats and names, until a notification appeared. He had awakened a new talent called Wind Whisperer. The wind would now bring him all sorts of information, whether he wanted to hear it or not. A slightly overwhelming gift, if we're being honest. He realized he had awakened yet another talent, and this one was a passive skill he couldn't turn off. He struggled to ignore the noise in his head. He pretended to be calm as he returned the gem to Qiu Chang, though his mind was reeling. By noon, we see him back at work with the Iron Soul. He practiced his fire control while correcting Wang Jianming's form in the Yuan Wang style. Suddenly, a new sound cut through the mental clutter. A raspy, gravelly voice echoed in his mind in full stereo, whispering to someone named Moon 6 to look at the two boys. This was not good. The voice remarked that they looked delicious and should be lunch. Zhang Pin spun around to see two sky foxes sizing him and Wang Jianming up like pieces of meat. Standing at the door, they stared. His heart sank, and he immediately gripped the cold jade in his pocket as flames ignited in his palms. Almost simultaneously, the ground beneath them transformed into a black hole, and all four of them plummeted into the darkness below. The two sky foxes reacted with terrifying speed, pouncing the moment they landed. Zhang Pin pulled Wang Jianming back, letting out a desperate shout. He warned his friend that these were monsters. Flames erupted from his palms, but one of the foxes simply tore through the fire with ease. The 3-meter-tall beast lunged for his vitals. He barely escaped with a clumsy roll, screaming toward an empty corner for help. He called out for Sister Cece, fearing he was finished, but Lu Sishan didn't appear. The power gap between the boys and these monsters was vast. They were outmatched by an entire rank, leaving them completely overwhelmed. Zhang Pin scrambled and crawled, doing anything just to stay alive. He fought with everything he had just to buy time. 30 seconds later, he was backed into a corner as the Sky Fox raised a claw with a sneer. He could practically smell his own end approaching. But right then, a stream of blue water shot out like a venomous snake. It sliced through the Sky Fox's neck in an instant. The massive head flew upward as golden liquid sprayed across the dark room like a fountain. Following the trail of water with his eyes, we see Lu Sishan standing in the corner, surrounded by a swirling mist of moisture. She looked like a goddess descending to earth. Without giving him a moment to breathe, she sent another stream of water toward the second beast. The other Sky Fox was dealt with just as easily. She told them to go back and that they would talk that evening. Before she even finished speaking, an invisible force launched Zhang Pin and Wang Jianming back into the Iron Soul. He slumped against the furnace, exhausted and shaken. He began consuming the flames to recover his strength, his mind filled with a single thought. He was still far too weak. He gritted his teeth. Squeezing out the last of his mental energy, he condensed a contract gem, swallowed it whole, and fell into a deep sleep by the fire. Meanwhile, at the city of Bamboo, a massive golden fox without a human mask sat on the main throne. This was the leader, King Moon. He noted with low, simmering anger that 9 of their kind had fallen this week. When a subordinate suggested killing all humans, he asked if they planned to eat grass instead. The room descended into chaos until King Moon commanded silence. Every fox went quiet instantly as he turned his gaze toward Prince Moon. King Moon asked his son for his opinion on how to draw out the hiding rats and eliminate them one by one. Prince Moon, a figure with a cold, stony expression, stepped forward. His voice was icy as he agreed. King Moon slowly closed his eyes, preparing to hibernate and retract his aura, leaving the rest of the plan in his son's hands. A glimmer of excitement flashed in Prince Moon's eyes as his towering silhouette stood before the king, ready to take control. He issued orders to all the Sky Foxes, declaring that he was now in command. The foxes responded in a thunderous, unified chorus of obedience. That night, inside the dark room, Wang Jianming couldn't wait a moment longer to ask Zhang Pin what was happening. Zhang Pin decided to tell him everything about the Sky Foxes. He explained the situation in detail. After listening, Wang Jianming's face turned deathly pale as he whispered his fear that his mother had been consumed. His voice trembled, noting she had been acting strange, and stopped cooking. Zhang Pin immediately gripped his shoulder to steady him. He told his friend not to scare himself just yet, promising to go to his house later to confirm the truth. Wang Jianming looked up, his eyes bloodshot. He asked what he should do if his mother really was gone. The answer was simple: seek revenge and eliminate the monsters responsible. Lu Sishan appeared suddenly in the dark room, startling both of them. To be honest, her timing was always a bit dramatic. Zhang Pin clutched his chest, complaining she nearly scared him to death. She ignored the remark, coldly stating that the beasts outside the city were about to riot. The patrol team had been wiped out by the Sky Foxes, leaving the city defenses useless. She warned them she wouldn't have time to protect them anymore. Zhang Pin interjected, revealing he knew the Sky Fox leader was hibernating, which had emboldened the other creatures to try and take a piece of the city. He had overheard the entire Sky Fox meeting through his Wind Whisperer ability. He cursed the monsters under his breath for their schemes. Lu Sisan looked at him with surprise, wondering how he knew so much. Her brow furrowed as she asked what else they were planning. Zhang Pin explained that the prince intended to watch the chaos and target anyone strong enough to resist the beasts. He was exposing their entire hand. They wanted to wipe out all the experts in Pearl City. Lu Sisan sneered, remarking that if they wanted to play games, they would see who died first. The next moment, the world spun for Zhang Pin and Wang Jiaming. In the blink of an eye, they were back at the Iron Soul Furnace. Wang Jiaming, still pale, grabbed Zhang Pin's arm and asked to sleep there. He was terrified that the woman at his home wasn't actually his mother. Zhang Pin sighed and pointed toward the guest room. Meanwhile, in a late-night meeting, the Sky Foxes continued their plan to stir up trouble. We see the humans deciding to spice things up. Situ Shirbai, that 200-year-old monster, gave a smiling order to activate the Phantom Light Heaven's wrath. If the foxes love to watch, they'll get an eyeful. Chen Ming, the half-baked prophet, pushed up his glasses and suggested they take a more aggressive approach. He wanted to eliminate as many as possible. Though the future was blurry, his intuition told him this plan would actually hold the city. Among the foxes, Yu felt the sky looked a bit fake. Yusen just grumbled at him to stop being paranoid and focus on finding food. Yu mocked him, completely unaware that they had been trapped in a dead end by the phantom light. To their eyes, they were in a busy district. But to Jin Bo and the combat team, the foxes were just birds in a cage. With a thunderous roar, Jin Bo gave the order to strike. Golden lightning patterns instantly erupted across his body, his hair standing on end like a god of war. He looked like a super scion, to be honest. From the distant watchtower, we see Jin Bo throw a punch that sent the 3-meter-tall Yu crashing directly into a concrete wall. The wall collapsed instantly. Then, Ding Cheng's eyes fired deep blue cutting beams, slicing through Yu's arm. The limb was severed as easily as cutting tofu, followed by a sky-shaking scream. Meanwhile, Lu Han's spiritual flying swords moved like ghosts. In the blink of an eye, a massive hole was opened in Yu San's chest. Zhang Pin couldn't help but mutter about how terrifyingly strong they were. Jin Bo gave them no room to breathe, unleashing a frantic assault on the 3 foxes who were already dizzy from the illusions. His fists were so heavy that the creatures were beaten beyond recognition. A final blow struck Yu Yi's vital spot. The fox's head burst like a melon. Without even glancing at the remains, Jin Bo ordered a retreat and vanished into the mist. Suddenly, a terrifying aura descended upon the square. It was Prince Moon. Zhang Pin instinctively reached out to use his appraisal skill. But his heart tightened painfully. A sense of mortal danger left him drenched in cold sweat as his intuition screamed at him to stop. He knew that if he dared to look, the prince's tail would take his head off in the next second. The gap in power was simply too vast. He gritted his teeth and tightly grabbed Lu Sishan's sleeve. Prince Moon landed in the square, staring at the 3 mangled corpses of his kin. A beastly roar tore from his throat as he ripped away the skin on his forehead, revealing his hideous true form and a crushing pressure. Even a kilometer away, Zhang Pin found it hard to breathe. He urgently told Sisan they had to leave before the monster discovered them. Lu Sisan let out a cold snort, grabbing him by the collar and rushing toward the city outskirts, noting that he was finally learning to be afraid. She warned him that over the next 5 days, she would train him until he didn't recognize himself, and he shouldn't blame her if he didn't survive. When he tried to mention his job at Iron Soul, she told him Wang Jiaming had already handled his leave and ordered him to be quiet as they reached the rocky beach. Before he could even find his footing, a stream of water from Sishan's side lashed out like a whip, slicing a nearby boulder clean in half. Realizing she was serious, he drew his dagger with a look of pure caution, understanding that this was the start of his true special training. Like a nimble smoke monkey, he began leaping frantically between the jagged rocks, his dagger flashing with a cold, metallic light. He aimed directly for Sisan, but to her eyes, his movements were as slow as a snail, and he couldn't even get close. A massive palm made of high-pressure water slammed into him, sending him crashing to the ground until he felt like his bones were falling apart. He hissed in pain, gasping for air, but Sisan had no intention of giving him a single moment to catch his breath. A barrage of water bullets swept toward him, forcing him to roll away in a desperate, clumsy attempt to dodge the onslaught. Sisan stopped her attack and looked down at him, asking if that was all he had, to which he grumbled that he was only at the 3rd rank. With a slight smirk, she told him he hadn't been pushed to his limits yet, and suddenly, dozens of water whips appeared out of thin air. They rained down on him from every direction, and as one struck his back, the pain was so intense his eyes nearly popped out of his head. Cursing her under his breath for actually trying to kill him, he finally stopped holding back, letting flames erupt from his palms. He formed a wall of fire to block the water whips, but they moved like the tentacles of an octopus, finding every possible opening. He danced and jumped as best he could, yet he was still being lashed until his entire body burned with a stinging, raw pain. Under the crushing pressure of this life and death struggle, he gradually entered a strange state where all unnecessary thoughts simply vanished. He began to feel the rhythm of the wind, predicting the path of the water whips and parrying them with precise bursts of flame. A minute later, his fire element energy was completely spent, and he collapsed onto the ground in total exhaustion, telling her to just finish him off. He closed his eyes, waiting for the end, but the water whips didn't fall. Instead, they were calmly drawn back to Sishan's side. The water whips transformed back into a simple sphere as Lu Sishan approached him, noting that for his rank, he truly had no equal. She admitted it took her a year to reach his level, suggesting he might be even faster. 2 hours later, we find him by a roaring campfire. He focused on absorbing the flames to restore his strength, scoffing at the idea of a mere 500 push-ups and aiming for 5,000 instead. He discovered he could train while simultaneously absorbing energy, granting him nearly infinite stamina. Naturally, he began training like a man possessed. After finishing his 5,000 push-ups, he spent the rest of the day running laps until night fell over the acidic grasslands. Sishan pointed toward a rabbit grazing nearby, identifying it as his next opponent. Without a word, he immediately activated his appraisal skill. It was a level 9 liquefied beast, capable of firing highly corrosive water bullets directly from its ears. A charming creature, to be sure. He watched the rabbit, calculating his move. The surrounding grass was toxic and sharp, making a stealthy approach nearly impossible. Suddenly, a spark of inspiration hit him. He released a small flame and noticed the toxic grass softened instantly when exposed to heat. He shed his shirt and shoes, charging forward barefoot while cloaked in fire. Under his burning steps, the grass withered before it could touch him. The rabbit reacted instantly, flicking its ears to unleash a spray of black corrosive bullets that tore through the air like a shotgun blast. He used his flames to evaporate most of the projectiles, but his dagger was left riddled with holes. He cursed, though he had no time for regrets. He lunged with his blade, but the rabbit curled into a ball, spraying a massive cloud of acidic fluid from its fur. In an instant, his dagger was corroded down to the hilt. He tossed the useless handle aside, his fists erupting into bright, defiant flames. He swung with everything he had, but the rabbit kicked off the ground and vanished. He could only shrug helplessly at Sishan. Sishan simply told him they were going to give chase. Half an hour later, they reached the center of the Salt Frost Tree Valley. A massive white tree towered 70 meters into the sky, its branches heavy with 20 shimmering, crystalline fruits. Below, a sea of liquefied beasts was locked in a brutal, chaotic struggle. He asked Sishan if she had really managed to steal a fruit here. He stared at the carnage, swallowing hard. She clarified that she said she tried to steal one, not that she succeeded. He spotted their runaway rabbit, but his heart sank as dozens of its kin emerged behind it. It wasn't just one rabbit after all. It was an entire nest of them. He looked at Sishan in disbelief, realizing she knew all along that these creatures used suicidal charges to cull their numbers. Sishan explained this calmly, just as a sudden, thunderous voice from the Stormbringer echoed in his mind, commanding him to move. In the next second, the hidden liquefied beasts and awakened ones surged toward the Salt Frost tree like a rising tide. Some sprinted up rainbow stairs toward the canopy, while others threw axes to build rope bridges. A group of giant white apes also joined the fray. Yiding plowed through like a bulldozer, carving out a path. At that exact moment, a massive white serpent, 20 meters long, burst forth from the earth. The serpent began devouring everything in sight as the rabbits launched their suicidal charge, turning the valley into a literal energy meat grinder. Before Sishan even finished her command, a path of ice crystallized beneath her feet, and she plummeted into the battlefield like a falling star. He followed close behind, leaping from the heights and clinging to the rocks as he aimed straight for the largest rabbit, the leader of the pack. As he appraised the leader of the water-eating bullet rabbits, his heart sank. It was an ultimate-tier liquefied beast. He felt the absurdity of being outmatched by a rabbit, but he couldn't back down now. He hoisted a frost-covered boulder to throw. He hurled it with all his might, but the rabbit leader leaped up and kicked the stone midair, causing it to explode into fragments. The impact sent him flying backward, his arms going numb and his chest tightening as he coughed up a mouthful of golden energy. Internal injuries, clearly. Ignoring the pain, he rolled to avoid a spray of acidic fluid and scrambled behind a rock on all fours, gasping for breath. He realized he had underestimated his opponent, a mistake he wouldn't make again. Peeking out, he saw Sishan carving a path of ice through the crowd. Suddenly, a piercing bird's cry echoed through the air as a small, flaming bird streaked toward the Salt Frost tree. His heart raced at the sight of the firebird, but the moment of hope was fleeting. To be honest, things were about to get much worse. The giant white serpent exhaled a freezing mist, causing the firebird to wail and fall, only to be swatted away by a white ape. A massive severed pig's head landed right in front of him, giving him quite a fright. He started to bypass it, but then hesitated and turned back. He pried open the pig's mouth, and a black bead rolled out. Without time to identify it, he pocketed the prize and pressed forward. Suddenly, a bolt of lightning struck, vaporizing half of the firebird's remains. He lunged forward, grabbed the charred half, and ran for his life. Collapsing behind the rock, he was as exhausted as a spent dog. He pulled out the black bead and began the appraisal process, which, fortunately, was a success. It was a nether mist orb, an energy core formed after the fall of a nether mist black mountain boar. Absorbing it offered a 1% chance of gaining the power to manipulate nether mist. He stared at the result in silence. To absorb or not to absorb? It was a truly philosophical question. Images flashed before his eyes. Su Jingyao's disguised face and the unsettling, arrogant smile of Prince Yu. He remembered the despair he felt at Tianchong Lake. Did a weakling like him really have the right to be picky? He gave a self-deprecating laugh. He tilted his head back and swallowed the bead. A second later, a massive surge of pain erupted from his stomach, leaving him curled in a ball. He felt something crawl from his stomach into his brain, and then, black mist began to seep from every pore. 5 minutes later, the agony finally faded. Sprawled on the ground, he used appraisal on himself. Level 9, 5-star potential, and a lifespan of 99 years. Not bad at all. He had a new talent, the Timeless One. When absorbing special items, there was now a 10% chance to gain a corresponding special constitution. And another, nether mist body, which allowed him to convert the fear of living beings into controllable mist. It was worth it. He nearly laughed out loud. His level had jumped by 6, his life was extended by a decade, and he had 2 incredible new talents, especially that nether mist. It gave him the power to harm enemies far above his level. He laughed until tears came. To be honest, the feeling of becoming stronger was intoxicating. Using his flames to recover his strength, he looked toward the rabbit leader nearby. It was time to settle the score. With a flick of his finger, a bolt of nether mist shot out. The rabbit leader reacted instantly, trying to kick the mist away, but the mist simply passed through its leg. It pierced straight through to its vitals, killing it instantly. He dragged the 40-pound rabbit back, using the mist to form a knife for skinning and gutting. He set it over a fire to roast, seasoning it with salt gathered from the ground. A strange, savory aroma filled the air as he tore off a leg. He took a bite. It was crispy on the outside and incredibly juicy. The taste was divine. However, he had overlooked one small detail on this battlefield. 3 black-skinned, red-eyed corpse hounds with human-like teeth caught the scent. They charged toward him like madmen, howling for a taste. Just as he jumped up, one hound lunged from behind, while another flanked him from the front. In that split second of life and death, the nether mist knife in his hand transformed into a flying blade. It took a bizarre, unnatural turn and pierced the vitals of the hound behind him. Taking advantage of the momentum, he retreated and swung his right hand to create a wall of fire, blocking the frontal attack as a flying blade shot through the flames. It struck another vital spot. He recognized these creatures as corpse hounds, and his expression darkened just as he leaped into the air. The ground exploded. A third corpse hound burst from the earth, opening its massive jaws to bite right at his crotch to finish him off. Both shocked and terrified, he threw the nether mist blade again, pinning the beast to the ground. He checked himself, breaking into a cold sweat. If that had landed, the consequences would have been unthinkable. He was about to deal with the remains when Lu Sishan suddenly returned. She looked spotless, holding a salt frost fruit in her hand. He was about to speak when a cold stream of water silently wrapped itself around his neck. Sister Sishan, what are you doing? He raised his hands, looking completely bewildered. Lu Sishan said nothing. She walked over to peel back his eyelids and circled behind him for a thorough inspection before finally withdrawing the water. You encountered a nether mist boar, she stated solemnly. Sensing something was wrong, he told her everything that had happened. There was no point in hiding it. An appraisal back at the city would strip away all his secrets anyway. After listening, Lu Sishan fell silent. She took several deep breaths, then suddenly turned and pinned him against a rock, roaring, Zhang Ping, do you have a death wish? How dare you eat something of unknown origin? Do you realize you almost died? He stared at her in disbelief. Almost died? Wait, he thought of his status bar, where the Timeless One sat above nether mist body. Could it be that the Timeless One had actually digested that parasite? Listen well, Zhang Ping, Lu Sishan said, her tone more serious than he had ever heard it. There is no such thing as a free lunch. If gaining superpowers were that easy, Pearl City would be crawling with dual ability users. Only then did he break into a belated cold sweat. Back at the camp tent, he took the water and salt frost fruit she offered and took a bite. His face immediately wrinkled like a bitter melon. Good heavens, this thing was salty enough to kill someone. He gulped down some water. Did I never teach you not to drink water from others in the wild? Lu Sishan asked suddenly. In the next second, his eyes widened. He felt something churning violently in his stomach. Suddenly, his entire body collapsed into a puddle of water. Lu Sishan stood there, stunned. She reached out to touch the liquid. Could it be pure water? Sister Sishan, you're poking my stomach. His voice echoed from the puddle. Half an hour later, we see him finally manage to regain his human form, a man now composed entirely of pure water. He checks his status, a 6-star potential. His new talent, the pure water body, allows him to transform into a liquid state. While in this form, he can absorb moisture to heal himself. Between recovering stamina and mending wounds, he feels today might just be his lucky day. Can you change back? Lu Sihan asks, her voice tinged with worry. With a simple thought, Zhang Ping's body gradually shifts from water back into flesh and bone. It was, to be honest, quite a seamless transition. Put your clothes on first, Lu Sihan says, tossing him his gear before turning her back. Even in a survival situation, some modesty remains. As he awkwardly dresses, he notices a layer of dust on the ground beneath him. It seems the pure water body naturally expels impurities from his system. Intrigued, he experiments further. Lu Sihan turns back, sees his arm still in a liquid state, and sighs. Just keep eating, she says, sounding slightly annoyed. She has to admit, she's a bit jealous. The next day, in a secluded spot, she decides it's time to put his new abilities to the test. Lu Sihan doesn't hold back, immediately lashing out with a whip of water. Zhang Ping transforms, absorbing the blow directly into his liquid form. As the whip merges into his body, Lu Sihan realizes she has lost control over that water. He is, quite literally, her natural counter. Next come ice spikes and boiling water, a relentless barrage of elemental attacks. Despite his constant shouting, he remains completely unharmed. Now, attack me, she commands, raising a water shield for defense. I like the sound of that, he replies, and before his voice even fades, a nether mist blade has already pierced her shield, stopping inches from her brow. Her pupils shrink as a cold sweat breaks out. Had he intended to kill, she would be dead. Why is the nether mist so powerful? He asks curiously, retrieving the blade. She explains that some scholars believe it descends from a king-tier beast. At the mention of king, the image of the prince of you flashes through his mind. His heart sinks. After a full day of testing, he gains a complete understanding of his powers. The nether mist absorbs fear within 10 meters. The energy cost is massive, but the power is undeniable. His pure water body grants immunity to physical attacks, though the transformation takes a full second. Furthermore, high temperatures double his stamina consumption. He even manages to develop a new technique, a specialized water mask. Lu Sihan gives her final assessment. His strength is now roughly half that of a high-level user, but his current level is still far too low. His stamina and mental focus simply can't sustain a high-intensity battle. To put it bluntly, his endurance is currently his greatest weakness. Furthermore, his combat experience is virtually zero. Against a serious high-level awakened, he would have no choice but to run. As evening falls, we see them returning to camp. Lu Sihan stops at the entrance, telling him she needs to make a trip back tonight. He simply nods and tells her to be careful. He walks into the camp and finds a group of survivors gathered around the campfire. Approaching them, he overhears them discussing strange occurrences in the city. Apparently, a bun shop owner turned into a sheet of skin, and people are vanishing from the Dragon Spear workshop. He listens intently to their nervous chatter, sensing the faint wisps of fear drifting from them, which he quietly begins to absorb. To keep the momentum going, he lowers his voice, interjecting with a mysterious air that he has some inside information. He claims there are several similar cases that the higher-ups are suppressing. The surrounding survivors gasp, and the atmosphere instantly becomes thick with dread. Standing in the center of the crowd, he enjoys the sensation of their fear transforming into power. Late that night, sitting by the fire, he looks at the belt formed from his special item. A thought occurs to him. If he tells ghost stories here, could he harvest even more fear? Being a man of action, he decides to try it immediately. He manipulates his power over his face, instantly creating a shifting, dynamic skull mask. Nearby, a corporate survivor catches a glimpse of him, lets out a terrified scream, and faints on the spot. Panicking, he dispels the mask and rushes over, pinching the man's pressure points and slapping his cheeks. He finally manages to wake the poor fellow, but the moment the man opens his eyes and sees him, he faints again. He eventually just drags him back to the fire. Returning to his tent, he uses a puddle of water as a mirror and startles himself. That face made of nether mist was, to be honest, hauntingly realistic. The man by the campfire wakes up once more, only to see the silhouette of the skull face projected onto the tent wall. He screams again, falling unconscious for a magnificent third time. He quietly lowers the tent flap, deciding this tactic will definitely terrify his enemies in battle. At 4 in the morning, Lu Sihan returns, her face etched with exhaustion and sorrow. Something has happened, she says, while unpacking her materials. In a heavy voice, she explains that the Prince of You came out to hunt. Jin Bo led a team to test him, but Jin Bo was gravely injured and 2 teammates died. His training is over. They are returning to the city at dawn. He feels a pang of anxiety and asks what powers the prince used. Just his tail, she replies. Lu Sihan's voice is raspy, carrying the weight of the grim news. He notices a pile of metal on the bed. Picking up a black iron piece, he asks what happens if he gets metal poisoning. She tells him not to worry. She hands him an antidote, and with a surge of resolve, he turns his mouth into pure water, opens wide, and swallows the iron whole. A second later, he feels as though his internal organs are being twisted into knots. He rolls on the ground in agony, gasping out a question about what that metal actually was. Lu Sihan's voice carries a hint of amusement as she confirms it was iron. He quickly uses his appraisal skill, only to find it was iron coated in lethal poison. He demands to know why she would poison it, and she calmly explains it is to test his resistance. Just as he is about to snap back in frustration, Lu Sishan suggests he try transforming into pure water. He pauses, realizing the logic, and instantly shifts his entire body into a fluid state. The sensation of being poisoned vanishes immediately. Lu Sishan watches him recover and mentions that she consulted the captain on his behalf. The captain suggests he focus on mastering just one or two abilities to their absolute limit. After all, while his powers may grow, a person's energy is finite. Coming from Situ Shiba, the master of mimicry himself, this advice carries significant weight, and so he decides to be truly ruthless with himself. He begins stuffing every material Lu Sishan brought back into his mouth, one by one, regardless of whether they are toxic. Hours later, he is sprawled on the bed, feeling like he might actually throw up, yet not a single new ability has manifested. It seems this method isn't quite as reliable as he hoped. After wriggling around the bed as a puddle, he returns to human form and tells Lu Sishan he has decided to focus on nether mist and his water body for now. Meanwhile, at the cleanup squad headquarters, Situ Shiba taps his fingers, and the entire office is instantly drained of color, turning into a world of black and white. A shadow operative appears before him. Without even looking up, Situ Shiba asks if the whereabouts of the investigation teams have been confirmed. Team 19 has left the city, and the 3 teams remaining inside show no abnormalities. To Situ, however, a lack of abnormalities is the greatest red flag of all. Situ Shiba lets out a cold laugh, ordering the shadow to investigate Captain Susu and find out the true extent of his injuries. He knows the truth deep down. For Lake Tianchong to invade so silently, there must have been an inside traitor. Since the patrol squad was wiped out, the survivors are the primary suspects. This makes the remaining investigation teams look incredibly suspicious. Once the shadow vanishes, Situ Shiba stares at the map with a deep, calculating gaze. He stands up, and his body splits in two. One half remains to handle paperwork, while the other pushes open the office door to head outside. Beyond that door lie the busy streets of Pearl City. At dawn, we see him and Lu Sishan returning to the city, where they eventually part ways. He returns to the Iron Soul workshop, where Chiu Chong asks why he's back so early. He claims he's a fast learner, but as he heads upstairs, he stops mid-step. He suddenly notices that Chiu Chong and Lu Taifeng have frozen in place. Turning around, we see a white-haired old man standing at the door with a gentle smile. The man's gaze feels as though it could pierce right through him. He drops his luggage, fully on guard, and asks who the stranger is. The old man simply tells him to use his appraisal skill. He tries, but the result is a string of failures, 66 times, to be exact. It seems some walls are simply too high to climb. After the 666th failure, his heart sinks, though deep down he has already guessed the man's identity. The cleanup squad captain, Situ Shiba. Situ Shiba tells him to stop wasting his effort and walks upstairs. After pouring a cup of tea, our protagonist cautiously asks how he should address his guest. Situ Shiba sees right through the little game, calling him a sly fox. He points out that through the wind rainers, the young man surely knows his name already. His heart skips a beat at the realization. Situ Shiba merely smiles faintly, noting that he shouldn't think too much until he learns to block mind-reading abilities. He immediately commands his mind to go blank. Situ Shiba mentions that in over 200 years, Pearl City hasn't seen another infinite halberd user. The captain sets down his teacup and looks at him. After all, how could he possibly resist coming to see such a rare talent for himself? He gets straight to the point. He is curious if his own mimicry can copy the infinite halberd. He reaches into a dark void and pulls out 2 items. He places an exaggerated scythe and a golden bracelet on the table. The scythe, Fear's Domain, can trigger terror and drain energy to purify itself. The other is the Golden Vault, a storage space of 450 cubic meters. Situ Shiba promises that regardless of the outcome, these are his to keep. In exchange for the test, he will also answer any questions. Looking at these 2 divine artifacts, the young man's breathing grows heavy with excitement. The scythe in particular feels as if it were forged specifically for him. He uses his appraisal skill to confirm its attributes, and the power is undeniable. He catches a glimpse of the brutal scenes from when they were forged and hesitates for a moment. Ultimately, however, he agrees to the deal. To be honest, the price Situ Shiba is paying is simply too high to refuse. The captain reaches out to touch him, and a second later, he sighs and says it's over. Confused, he asks if that was really it. Situ Shiba shakes his head, admitting that he cannot copy the boy's ability, a rare disappointment for the master of mimicry. He isn't entirely surprised, though. He helps bind the equipment to its new owner and begins to answer the boy's burning questions about the world. He asks why someone as powerful as Situ Shiba hasn't personally dealt with the Moon Prince. Situ walks to the window, explaining it isn't a lack of will, but a lack of ability. He explains that Pearl City possesses a king-rank artifact called the Sun Moon Pearl, which should downgrade any king-rank beast that enters. But things have changed. The realization hits him instantly, and his face turns pale. There is a traitor within the city walls, a remnant of the disgraced Zhu family. A flicker of sorrow passes through Situ Shiba's eyes as he begins to recount the dark history of 200 years ago. He clenches his fists in a silent rage, wondering why a family that treated humans like slaves and livestock wasn't wiped out back then. Shiba offers a bitter smile, noting that the situation is far more complex than he imagines. After a long talk, the true state of Pearl City gradually becomes clear. Now, the most urgent task is to identify the traitor and uncover the true nature of the Skyfox King. Since he is the only one who can see through the Skyfox's disguise, his mission is to investigate the Moon Prince. Over the following days, he settles into a strict routine, studying by day, practicing his boxing in the evening, and transforming his identity late at night. He wanders the streets of Pearl City, hunting for those hiding in the shadows, yet the city's surveillance cameras show absolutely nothing. This silence is a warning in itself. He is certain the Zhu family remnants are using some method to bypass the city's monitoring. At midnight, he drifts through the streets like a ghost, scaring a few criminals along the way to collect high-quality fear. Suddenly, we see him spot 3 individuals acting in a highly suspicious manner. He reports the 3 shady figures through his badge. Lu Sishan's voice crackles back, promising to check with Manny. The background is filled with the sounds of battle. Soon, Manny reports that Skyfire Road shows no abnormalities. If even the cameras can't see them, Lu Sisan realizes something is very wrong. She warns him not to act rashly and to wait for her. He puts away the badge, transforming into a massive black python shrouded in mist. He silently glides onto a rooftop to observe from above. He watches the 3 men use a few stones to break the barrier of a luxury villa. He uses his appraisal skill on the objects, array-suppressing stones that can mask most barriers. The vision of how these items were made is truly horrifying. They were forged using the life source of living, awakened humans. His gaze hardens with resolve. He makes a silent vow that he will never allow the beast-taming Zhu family to rise from the ashes. The trio slips into the villa as if searching for someone. He watches patiently until they emerge from a room carrying a sleeping girl. They're trying to escape. He immediately follows, using his appraisal on the girl. Her name is Chun Junting, and she has a 12-star potential. Her talent is the body of holy light, possessing a source energy capable of influencing all life. With 12-star potential, it is enough to make anyone catch their breath. While the full utility of such a body remains a mystery, he knows one thing for certain. He cannot let them take her. He covers his face with his mask, and wielding the fierce scythe, he leaps from the roof like a descending god of death. The man guarding the rear catches one look at his face and is instantly paralyzed by pure terror. With a single swift strike, the man's vital points are pierced. The leader, Zhu Hongyan, turns pale at the sight. He barks an order to his subordinate, Huang Wu, telling him to stay behind and block the intruder's path. In an instant, he pierces through Huang Wu. As he rushes past the remains, he feels a surge of pure, purple fear unlike anything he has ever felt before. This energy flows into him, making his mask and cloak feel more solid. He finds he can even float off the ground, moving faster than a bullet. He transforms into a dark shadow, rapidly pursuing the fleeing Zhu Hongyan. Suddenly, a sharp arrow whistles through the air from the side. The projectile strikes a vital spot, but he simply dissolves into a puddle of water and quickly reforms. A masked archer lands gracefully before him. Without a single word, the stranger fires another arrow crackling with electricity. To be honest, this assassin isn't interested in conversation. A whip of water lashes out from the distance, knocking the arrow aside. He shouts toward Lu Sisan, telling her to ignore him and save the girl. Lu Sisan doesn't hesitate for a second, immediately turning to give chase. Now, only he and the masked archer remain in the silent alleyway. The masked man fires an arrow into the sky. The moment he looks up, the assassin appears behind him like a ghost, wielding a lightning-charged dagger. The blade sinks deep into his back, and he is instantly shocked into a pool of charred, black liquid. The assassin mutters that he should never look away. With a cold sneer, the masked man pulls out oil to destroy the remains. But suddenly, countless sharp spikes erupt from the charred liquid. The spikes pierce through the assassin's hand. His face emerges from the liquid, and in a chilling tone, he thanks the man for the lesson. Countless flying daggers shoot out from his body, forcing the masked man into a frantic defense. He had miscalculated. He had no idea what this power truly was. The archer had been far too arrogant. He assumed a 16-year-old novice couldn't be a threat, relying on his ring that could release 100,000 volts. Combined with the lethal poison on his brush, any opponent below the top tier should have collapsed instantly. But he was wrong. His reliance on experience had betrayed him, as he realized his opponent was fighting like a seasoned veteran. He keeps his distance, wearing the man down with daggers. 10 minutes later, when the assassin has nowhere left to run, 30 blades fly at him all at once. One blade strikes his knee with surgical precision, ending the fight. And yet, seeing his battered body, he remains cautious and refuses to step any closer. He throws a few more daggers, only to find the man still hasn't collapsed. Just finish it, the masked man groans. Honestly, the man's resilience is almost terrifying. Startled by this display of an awakened's vitality, he uses his flames to recover his strength while keeping a watchful eye on his opponent. This time, he wastes no more words, manifesting a flying dagger and aiming it straight for a vital spot. "You really are cautious," the masked man says with a bitter smile. Suddenly, the assassin crushes the ring on his finger. Sensing immediate danger, his hair stands on end as he wraps himself in layers of protective energy. Then, a massive boom. A bolt of lightning descends from the heavens, instantly turning the masked man to ash and shattering every pane of glass in the surrounding area. The shockwave sends him flying, his heart pounding against his ribs. The commotion is far too loud. The lake of eternal heaven has been disturbed. He immediately contacts Lu Sishan. He tells her to retreat at once. Meanwhile, at the bamboo mansion, Prince Yu leaps from a window as the tails behind him begin to branch out infinitely. Like a massive web, the tails envelop the entire city. Every eye upon those tails snaps open, scanning the barrier room of the cleanup squad. Manny, who is monitoring the situation, pales as she realizes the lake of eternal heaven is reacting. Acting decisively, she targets Lu Sishan, who is currently fighting Zhu Hongyan, and teleports her directly back to the secret chamber. Elsewhere, before Zhu Hongyan can even react, Prince Yu appears right in front of him. Luo Shiyu. Zhu Hongyan recognizes the face, but he knows all too well that the entity before him is Prince Yu. So, you know who I am? The prince asks. Prince Yu narrows his eyes, a tail coiling around the man and dragging him close. He catches the scent of the blade marks on the wall and sneers coldly. You all fought so hard just to snatch her away. I have no idea what you're talking about, Zhu Hongyan insists. How interesting, Prince Yu replies with a smirk. A tail pierces through the man's vital points instantly. He then picks up the unconscious girl, Chen Junting, and mutters to himself, I wonder if eating you would be fun. Just then, Chen Junting wakes up. She looks at Prince Yu and gives a sweet, innocent smile. Sister, you're so beautiful. Prince Yu's raised hand freezes. He wants to eliminate this girl, yet he finds himself completely unable to strike. He turns away and lets out a raspy roar. Yueying, finish her. Yueying lunges from the shadows, but a moment later, his own claws sink into his own shoulder. Your Highness, I cannot do it. Prince Yu trembles violently, his tail stopping just inches from Chen Junting's face at the very last second. A crushing sense of guilt washes over him. Finally, gritting his teeth, he decides to take Chen Junting back to the bamboo mansion first. Meanwhile, through his wind rain listener ability, he overhears fragmented conversations that confirm his suspicions. Chen Junting's power is anything but simple. Taking advantage of the chaos, he returns to the alley to scavenge for spoils. Suppressing his discomfort, he begins searching the two sets of remains. He manages to recover a copper ring lantern and a ring. Just then, a burst of flame explodes beside him as a red-haired youth appears. The youth, clearly possessing a fiery temper, steps forward and suggests they split the loot. He slowly turns around, his expression unreadable. The mask of the Reaper manifests on his face as his black cloak flutters without a breeze. Raising his dread scythe, he asks in a hollow, echoing voice, What did you say? The red-haired youth's legs instantly turn to jelly from sheer terror. We move to the next morning, where he wakes to see Prince Yu's tail sweeping across the city sky. The phantom light barrier has essentially failed. Pearl City is now facing a purge by the ethereal beasts. With a heavy heart, he decides to stay low for now at the Iron Soul Smithy. Meanwhile, at the City Lord's mansion, Prince Yu watches Chen Junting with a growing headache. This girl's ability is far too bizarre for comfort. He finds himself unable to harbor any hostility toward her, or even refuse her requests. For now, he is forced to keep this little troublemaker close, lest she accidentally charm the entire Lake of Eternal Heaven tribe. Sister Shiyu, won't your family worry about you? Junting asks with wide, innocent eyes. I have no family, Prince Yu replies stiffly. I don't have a mother either, Junting adds, seemingly unfazed by his cold tone. She explains she grew up with her grandfather, who never let her out, and now that she's escaped, she won't go back. She then pours him a cup of tea. With a cheerful grin, she tells him to drink up, claiming her tea is the best. Prince Yu stares at the cup, which is clearly made from low-quality leaves. He looks at her expectant gaze and, gritting his teeth, downs the whole thing. To be honest, he probably should have reconsidered that move. The tea hits his system so hard he's forced to rush to the restroom, even retracting the 5 tails that were monitoring the entire city. At the exact moment Prince Yu leaves, a man named Zhu Ziming enters a vast, white void through a secret ritual in a hidden chamber. Ziming, what happened last night? An elder demands sternly. Ziming explains it was a case involving the cleanup squad and a brat named Zhang Ping. He ruined our plans, Ziming replies humbly, promising to deal with him tonight. As for Chen Junting, he notes she is currently with the fox. He vows to get her out soon. He must, for she is the key to dealing with that old man, Situ Shirbai. And this is where the plot truly thickens. We find Zhang Ping in the restroom, of all places, identifying last night's spoils. After he infuses the green lantern with his essence, it unexpectedly evolves into a ghost lantern, granting absolute invisibility against anyone below king rank. A miraculous find, to say the least. Next, he examines the copper ring and the band. As expected, their creation was steeped in cruelty, causing him to grit his teeth in disgust. He stores the items in his golden treasury just as a voice calls from outside, asking if he's shitting diamonds because he's taking so long. Meanwhile, at the cleanup squad headquarters, Situ Shirbai is holding a meeting to review the details of last night's operation. Situ Shirbai looks toward Lu Sihan and tells her to pick 2 items from the armory, one for herself and one as a reward for Zhang Ping. It was a pointed suggestion, and Sihan understands immediately. She is to find Zhang Ping tonight. Shen Mingxiang tries to object, but Shirbai cuts him off. The leader declares he will personally provide cover for Sihan this time. At the city lord's mansion, Zhu Ziming stops a predatory ethereal fox in the corridor. He asks the creature to take care of someone for him, handing over a crescent wolf's canine as payment. Naturally, the fox agrees without hesitation. By nightfall, we return to the Beast King Gym, where the group is busy learning a new technique called the Phoenix Claw. Zhang Ping hands out the incredibly expensive secret medicine to the others, silently cursing the gym's prices 100 times over. During free sparring, he approaches Wang Jiaming and suggests they practice together. Jiaming sheepishly admits he hasn't even mastered the basics yet. Zhang Ping just smiles and tells him it's fine to just try. Deep down, he knows Jiaming has likely been bullied while he was away.